Welcome back to Reading Bear. Today, we will take a look at some new revenge stories. And if you enjoyed my content, please don't forget to subscribe to my channel and post some bear emojis in the comments. Let's go!
First one is titled, Drive a Tractor Around Inebriated and Ignore My Calls. Buddy. So I have this neighbor whose name is Boo. Boo is quite a colorful character. His driver's license was permanently suspended about 8 years ago because of the number of DUIs he has received, so his only mode of transportation to work is a 1948 Farmall tractor. After work he will sometimes drive his tractor over to his girl's house where he will stay until he gets good and plastered, then he will drive back home very intoxicated, running over mailboxes and swerving all over the road. Anyway, I ended up purchasing 2 old pickup trucks off of his property, which was really stupid of me, but I was only paying $150 per truck. It really didn't matter if I got screwed, or so I thought. One was pretty easy to get to, so I loaded it up on my trailer and figured that I could get the other one in a couple of days. Boo started making excuses why I couldn't come to get the other truck. One day he was working even though the store he worked at was closed. Another day he was supposedly out of town even though I drove by his house an hour later and he and his dad were sitting on the porch. Stuff like that. I got really upset about it because this dragged out for a couple of months and just really wanted him to suffer for the annoyance he caused me. So I told a friend of mine who happens to be a county sheriff that he was driving a tractor on a public road without a license. Boo ends up getting pulled over a few nights later and gets arrested for DUI and operating a motor vehicle without a license. He also had several warrants for his arrest, so he's going to be spending the next few years in the county jail. I don't feel bad about this at all because almost everyone in my community hated Boo. Side note, a few weeks after Boo got arrested, his house got raided by a bunch of people in black SUVs with government plates, I'm assuming the D, and his dad was arrested for cooking and distributing hard drugs. So I'm pretty sure Boo sold him out to get a lighter sentence. Lastly, where I'm from, a tractor can be operated on a public road if it is being used to conduct agricultural business, going to or returning from harvesting crops. Tractors are not allowed to be operated on a public road for personal use. Tractors are also not allowed to be operated on public roads if they do not have proper safety equipment such as hazard lights and slow-moving vehicle signs. This varies by state and country, but these are the laws where I live. Next one is titled, Don't Want to Play Fair? The Neighborhood Remembers and Punishes. To set the stage, I used to live in a big but not huge city, let's call it Palmville. I lived near the corner of a dense suburb nestled between overstuffed apartment buildings, a river that smelled like diesel when at low tide, and 2 busy highways. I was a minority in this neighborhood and I caught a lot of heat for it. People didn't really like white people there, but enough of our neighbors were accepting of us that aside from a few disagreements between families and the beatings that came with them, I didn't feel like I was in danger when leaving my home. It was a rough neighborhood, but it was my home, and it protected its own. The community center was like a temple, and let's call her AM was the priestess. In our neighborhood she was respected like a living deity, and her calm and understanding reflected her status. I never once saw her behave without a strong moral code. And the final piece to set this stage, our former landlord. Short Asian lady in all the stereotypical ways, kind and sweet. Our house was above my parents' pay grade and she knew it. She went out of her way to find house repair and maintenance jobs for tenants that were having money problems. She'd pay them by taking chunks out of their rent, oftentimes a bit larger than how much the work they did was worth. Looking back, that was probably illegal, but that's irrelevant because she died. The circumstances surrounding her death were suspect, but none of the suspects play a part in this story, so there's no need to go into detail on it. Her sons, who wanted nothing to do with real estate, took over the business. They couldn't make heads or tails of how she managed to float books with so much red in them and began dumping properties. Ours was on that list. I harbor no ill will towards them, and still wish them the best, but the guy who bought the house, enter the sociopath and today's victim. This guy wasted no time in making our lives hell. His first action was to raise the rent. Apparently when the account changed hands, he was allowed to update the rent to modern pricing. We'd been there for several years and were paying below market even from the onset, so this was a huge blow by itself. The second blow came when he said that the rent had to be ready, in full, on the 1st of every month, no partial payments, and no work to reduce it, no extensions. Full rent on the 1st of the month or an eviction notice on the 2nd. This was hemorrhaging our savings, but we were surviving for the moment. Meanwhile, AM had lobbied hard for the city to co-fund a revival project to renovate the entire aging suburb, and she succeeded. One street at a time had conga lines of work trucks almost every day, and people were getting old leaky pipes replaced, sinkholes in yards patched, fences repaired, paint renewed. It was an amazing thing, and an enticing thing for the sociopath. Being at the corner of the neighborhood, our house was on the last street on the list, and sociopath wanted us out so he could relist the house after renovation. He never said this directly, but multiple conversations made his intent clear even for 10-year-old me. Random inspections, overhyping of minor problems with the house, even so far as trying to bring us up on completely false animal abuse charges because our cat was attacked by what we believe was a raccoon, and he tried to claim we did it, because a vet can't figure out the difference between knife wounds and a mauling. We read the writing on the wall and began preparations to move. We decided to move in with my oldest brother in a place I'll call Banjoland. Most of us had moved except my other brother, who stayed behind because he still had a lot of social ties in Palmville, and his new job meant if he cut corners, he could keep paying sociopaths inflated bills. Well, despite his best efforts, he came up $20 short one month and sociopath jumped on it. He had 30 days. We made the 400-mile trip from Banjoland to Palmville to get the rest of our stuff, and I can't say as I approved of my brother's living conditions, but I guess that's beside the point. The month passed rather uneventfully. I guess sociopath figured he'd won, so there was no need to burn the gas to drive out and gloat. The neighborhood had learned what was going on, and that was the first time I'd ever been back in that neighborhood where I didn't get a single call out, a single glare, a single racist remark. Everybody behaved reverently. It was kind of disturbing in all honesty. I guess people in lower incomes all know what eviction means and felt like I was having a bad enough time already. Well, 20 days later he says it's time to leave. We still had a week left, but it didn't matter, we didn't have the money to try fighting it with a lawyer. AM descended from the heavens and bought us a couple extra days, but it was evident he really wanted us out, possibly because the work trucks were now one street away. The last time I ever saw the house I grew up in, workmen were throwing my childhood possessions into a large bin when we supposedly still had 3 days left to leave. Everything that follows is a collection of information I got through the grapevine and phone calls with people present at the events. Immediately, sociopath moved into the house himself. Why, you may ask? People who owned the homes they were living in were getting the full cost of renovations comped by the city. He figured that by moving in himself, he'd be able to get this house he bought at liquidation price renovated for free and flip it. AM was having none of it. She explained to him that at the time the revival project was approved, that house was a rental lot, and they can't change the budget now. She then explained to him that the partial cost coverage that had been approved for the lot was in our name, not his, and he wasn't eligible for partial cost comping either. He'd have to pay every penny himself, and since the entire neighborhood was getting a facelift, he was required to at least renovate the exterior, otherwise she'd see the house condemned as an eyesore or dilapidated or whatever the legal term is. He went really cheap on the renovations, basically put in new carpets and a coat of paint. This would later come to bite him in the butt. He then began trying to sell the house in earnest. The neighborhood remembered what he'd done. There were vandalisms when nobody was there and loud noises from the neighbors when people were there to look the house over. And anytime a prospective buyer asked around, they got the full stink eye from anybody they talked to. They made sure he simply couldn't get that house sold at market value. After 3 months of this, he lowered the listing price. Then a month later he lowered it again and finally got a bite. AM personally made sure he had to file every single piece of paperwork before it changed hands. Every single part of the house had to be inspected thoroughly. And that's when Karma herself caught up with him. In his hasty and cheap renovations, he'd somehow damaged the pipes. Black mold. AM remembered how he'd treated us and she decided to pay him back in kind. I never heard how exactly she pulled it off, but she managed to delay him getting the news about the black mold being discovered for several days, long enough that by time he did get the news he didn't have enough time left to try getting it cleaned or make a last-ditch effort to save the house. The house was condemned days later. In their final act, AM and members of the neighborhood filed every single complaint and injunction they could and arranged for him to be compelled by the city to demolish the house immediately. A cost he had to pay out of his own pocket. He tried to destroy a family and broke laws just to make some quick cash, and instead was left fighting a year-long legal battle and ended up losing thousands. The neighborhood remembers. The neighborhood punishes. Next one is titled, Rabs, We Do Not Prank Here, A Sparky's Tale. Rural-ish, goodly-sized town in Australia, years ago. I'd been at this electrical contracting company for 5 years at this stage. 15 Sparkies, electricians, 12 apprentices, admin and support staff. It was the kind of workplace I hoped everyone got to experience at least once in their life. The owner valued the staff over the business. If you were staff, or partners or kids of staff, you were part of the family. Everyone was paid above award wages, safety was never compromised, staff turnover was very low, everyone was competent or grown in their role to be so, and everyone got along. Co-workers would even socialize outside work. It was a mix of industrial, commercial, government, and duck my life, a bit of residential. We had a reputation of doing a job once and doing it well. In the 5 years, I think there was maybe one legitimate call back to fix our own work. Okay, so Warren was a new hire Sparky. Of course, in true Aussie fashion, he immediately became Rabs. In his 3rd week, Rabs put zipties around one of the guy's work vehicle's tail shaft. This is entry-level pranking in the construction industry. With long, thick zipties on a tail shaft, when you start to drive off it sounds like something has come loose under the car. As a team led, I pulled him aside and gave him the good news, we don't prank here mate. Not even just the zipties. Nothing. Sure, we give the apprentices the traditional fool's errand crap, as you do. Like sending them to find a left-handed screwdriver. But we don't prank each other. It is currently verboten, forbidden. I told him about the prank escalation saga of the previous year. It too started with zipties on tail shafts. It ended 9 weeks later with minor damage to vehicles, and almost collateral damage, apprentice being injured, and a very direct talking to for us all from the owner. He blanket banned any further pranking. It was the only time I'd seen him angry. I'm not going to write a how to prank book here. Things started small, got more and more elaborate, then messy. We had 15 tradies, with varying degrees of knowledge of electrical systems, control systems, electronics, pumps, actuators, relays, radio transmitters, receivers, welding, etc., and access to a ton of equipment and toys. 15 evil MacGyvers. The next week, I suspected he wouldn't be passing his 3-month probation period. 2 things happened. 1. It became obvious that he'd polished his resume when he got sent to look at a pressure pump, that he haughtily declined any advice or assistance with, then blew the ducking thing up. 2. He didn't listen, and on the Friday, he put zipties on my vehicle's tail shaft. Time to drive the point home. I didn't pull him aside again. Having kept a few items from the prank saga, I came into work early on the Saturday morning and got to business. Forklifting down my forbidden pallet from way up in the racking, I uncovered my handmade Perspex box, and set it up. It was made out of 12mm or 1/2 thick sheets of clear Perspex, and was 1 meter by 0.5 meters by 0.5 meters or 40 inches by 20 inches by 20 inches. The sides were hinged, sealable, and clasped, so you could unfold it. The removable sealable top had breather holes, and clasps to secure it to the sides. It also had screws driven through it, all spread out. Because he was still on probation, Rabs wasn't on call, and had to leave his work vehicle at work. Grabbing the keys, I opened his toolboxes and unloaded his cordless tools, drill, impact gun, angle grinder, and hammer drill onto a workbench. Then began dismantling them. The components of a cordless power usually tool include the 2 halves of an outer shell, the inner working of the tool, and screws of varying sizes to hold it all together. The shell sections I wrapped in cling film. The inner workings of each tool went into its own big Ziploc bag. All the different sized screws, from all the tools, went into one Ziploc bag. Because, fuck him. Through trial and error during the prank saga, I'd refined the use of this box. One by one, each item got put on the upturned lid and tied to a screw with string. When finished and holding the lid the right way up, it looked like a weird mobile. Or a 3D exploded parts diagram. After coating both sides of the lid and inside walls of the box with silicone spray, the lid got lowered and sealed. Then I went and got the cans of expanding foam. The nozzles fit well into the sealable injection point in one side of the box. After being squirted in, the foam would rise up past all the hanging parts, the parts having been spread out to ensure even distribution throughout the box. While the foam was rising, I set about making a spray paint stencil from a sheet of cardboard. Late Sunday afternoon, coming back to the box, I was met with a solid block of yellowish, hard foam. After taking the top screws out, the silicone spray made it easy to unfold the box. The string got trimmed and the sides tidied. It was a nice looking block. The stencil was used across one side with red spray paint. A trolley helped get the block of foam out to the smoko table. I got into work early on Monday, before the owner, and filled him in. He was disapproving, but understood. Sometimes it's easier to ask forgiveness than permission. When the guys started rocking up, I was at the table and was met with variations of, "Oh crap, not again." So, he ducked up then. That ducking box. When Rabs showed up, he saw the stenciled message, "Rabs. We do not prank here." He asked what was going on, and I told him exactly what was in the big block of foam. And why. And that while Zipties might be his pranking starting point, this was mine. The owner appeared and gave us a refresher on the pranking ban. Over the next couple of weeks, Rabs got to use the spare power tools at work as he rebuilt his at home. Honestly, putting all the screws in one bag was about the worst thing I could have done. He didn't prank again. None of us did. Rabs got let go short of his probation period. He just ducked up too much, on simple jobs, despite being given guidance, training, and a fair go. It was a shame really. I don't like seeing fellow tradesmen fail. Next one is titled, "Enjoy the Puppies." It's a beautiful, snowy day in New England, so I grabbed my camera and my 2 dogs for some outside fun. All goes well until I make it to an open field and start throwing a ball for one of my dogs. All of a sudden I hear somebody yelling their dog's name. I turn around and notice one of those curly-haired designer dogs running toward us. This dog of course ignores the owners and approaches quickly. She runs up and starts sniffing my dog, then runs between my legs, tangling with my leash. One of my dogs is leash reactive, which means he can freak out if a dog approaches him, so I just stand there calmly, trying to hang on to my camera, a ball launcher, and the leash, waiting for the owner to take his dog and put her on a leash. This is an annoying story that happens almost daily, so I have learned not to bother me too much. He finally gets there and pulls her away, but instead of putting on a leash, he kind of shoos her away in another direction. 2 minutes later, I hear him yelling her name again. Guess what? The exact same story happens. My reactive dog is actually okay, he clearly doesn't consider her a threat, so I just wait for him to approach and take the dog away. I'm sure he'll put her on a leash this time. He doesn't. The dog approaches for a 3rd time. I look behind me and see that my dog has started humping her. Usually I would ask him to stop, because I know people get annoyed about this even though it's harmless, my dog is fixed. But this time I just laugh and shake my head. The owner is approaching quicker this time. "Please don't let him do that," he yells. "Do you have a leash?" I ask. "Is your dog neutered?" he yells. "Yeah, I'm sure he just got her pregnant," I respond sarcastically. "She's in heat," he yells. "What is she doing off-leash approaching other dogs then?" I ask. "We were just playing," he says. "Well, enjoy the puppies," I say. Full disclosure, I did end up telling him my dog was fixed, but I kinda wish I'd just walked away. Hopefully he learned his lesson anyway. Next one is titled, "Last Appointment of the Day." Scheduled my annual exam for 6:45 on a Tuesday night, and worked my butt off after work to get dinner on the table for my spouse and 1-year-old before trekking to downtown Chicago. About an hour 15 before my scheduled appointment, the nurse calls me to ask if I could possibly come in earlier. I'm the last appointment of the day, and doc has nobody before me. In all my mum panic, I'm like, sure. I think I can be there about 6:15. Well, my tiny human was being a tinier hole, and traffic into downtown was stupid. I arrive at 6:30 p.m. apologizing only once for not arriving sooner. The registration assistant proceeds around the corner to tell the nurse I have arrived. I then hear this nurse talking smack about how I said I would be there by 6:15, and she guesses that she must not understand the definition of early. Now, I would normally let this slide. But I don't get out much these days with COVID and a baby, so I went a little MJ 90s Bulls for Eva and took it personally. My diet over the last few days has mostly been chicken wings and pulled pork sandwiches, and my digestive tract is on its way to hell. While the nurse is taking my vitals, I proceed to pufter a cloud of radioactive material into the 8 by 10 feet room. It smelled like death and barbecue sauce. She hurriedly gave me my instructions for the exam and booked it on out of my little exam room of doom. Luckily the air cleared out quickly, and my doc and I had a great visit. All future farts were let go in larger public spaces so as not to disturb the rest of society. I love and support healthcare workers, especially nurses who work through hell. Just next time if you're going to talk some crap, do it where I can't hear you. Last one is titled, Flip It and Reverse It. So, I have to preface this quickly by saying that I'm generally pretty easygoing, but if you mess with me, well, you'll see what happens. Basically, I suspected one of my coworkers, call him G, was cheating on his wife. Normally, I wouldn't give a crap, because I'm not the morality police, but I considered his wife, call her J, as a friend. So I told her, I think your husband's cheating on you. Making sure to tell J that I couldn't prove it, and I was just giving her a heads up. Instead of being smart and checking G's phone or doing any sort of digging for herself, J just confronted G when he got home. Telling G that I told J that he was cheating. Turns out he actually was cheating on her and confessed on the spot. So now G's upset with me for exposing his dirty laundry, and J's upset with me for telling her because ignorance is bliss. So G tried to get me fired by faking texts between me and J, pretty sure she helped, where I confessed to sleeping with one of the managers. It's against company policy and could have gotten both myself and the completely unwitting manager fired. G told everyone I was sleeping with this guy and that guy, and he threatened to post a pic of me in lingerie online. I'd sent the pic to J months ago asking for her opinion. It wasn't super revealing or an erotic pose or anything super racy, I guess, and yes, girls do this, but still, no one wants private photos online. He made a YouTube video threatening to expose people at work and share nude pics of the hoes he worked with. I don't know what pics G had of others, if he had any at all, but it was clearly aimed at me and another woman who he hated because she'd already rejected his sorry butt. I found this out literally years later. But I turned it right around. I proved the texts to be faked, hinted that perhaps he stole my phone because it was missing for a few hours at work, but I hadn't thought anything of it until now. Turned on the water works about how I couldn't handle the pressure anymore. G is constantly telling rumors about me sleeping around. It makes me feel like a witch. He's only mad at me because I told his wife he was cheating. Like, I caught him doing things with C, his mistress, here at work, and for my final move I deliberately bumped my shoulder into G hard, in front of the only camera in the back room, backing up so quickly I almost fell looking like a deer caught in the headlights. And immediately told a manager, not the one I was accused of sleeping with, that G was still being threatening and bumped into me, saying, I think it was an accident, but with everything else going on I thought you should know. He reviewed the tapes along with 2 other managers and everyone agreed that G hit me. So they fired G's butt for harassment. As far as I know, G's divorced, his mistress dumped him, and he's living off EI in a shitty little apartment. Told you, mess with me and you'll see what happens. Thanks for listening.